said you follow the money. And when growers plant more blueberries, they've had a good year. When they keep planting more blueberries, they have a good year. And as I used to tell my growers, as I worked directly with them, that I never had a grower make any money, but I said, I've watched what you do in the winter following the season. And if you took a vacation or bought new tractors and trucks and more land, you must have made money. So anyway, that was Alan, certainly that's a good report about the Washington Commission and what they're doing. And so I'll take a look this morning at the blueberry opportunities. I said yesterday, and maybe I'm listening to too many growers in Michigan, New Jersey, Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, but truly the heart of the industry has moved here to the Northwest. And the threat outside of the Northwest is probably some of the importing countries, and we've been involved in them as well. And so hopefully we'll give some insight of what I see there. But we'll kind of look at the 2019 production. I've kind of put things in graphs. I'm a table guy, kind of like Alan is, but people told me people don't read tables well, so I try to put things in graphs. And then you'll look at utilization, both fresh and frozen, and we'll take a look ahead. This was a slide I presented back here in January of 2017. And in 2017, this crop, 2016 had been the record crop built upon the wild industry having 395 million pounds. Let's see, I've got to get that red dot up there. Have I? No. For them to see that. But so in 2016, this was the biggest year we'd ever had. And out of that 2016, as we can see, we were just shy of 1.2 billion pounds here in North America. And I made a projection in that year that we would hit 1.2 billion in 18. The reason I put this up here is we go to the next slide and we'll see what took place. Here's 2018, here's 19. We fell back significantly. The wild fell back in 2018. The wild fell back from actually 400 to 225. And we didn't have those big crops. And so we really kind of fell into thinking that maybe things weren't going to hit there. Well, 2020 or 2019 hit. And we can see here that we're back almost to that 2016 crop. And wild industry, some of the numbers that just come in, this number I got only on Monday this week. I've been using 225 for a preseason forecast. The September 30th forecast was 239. And the number came in this week, 291 million pounds in the wild industry. Far more than we anticipated, although I will show later, I'm not surprised when I look at some of my cold storage relationships. High bush process is now is 409. And that's with the update that we just received here. That's without the update this morning. So we're going to end up with about just nearly a record crop again of what we had in 2016 with what's taken place. You know, I just put this out here to show a forecast, and I think my forecasts are exceedingly minimal, and Alan's forecasts are much more aggressive. And kind of coming off of that 2018 or 16 crop when we didn't come back and make those numbers. One of the areas that I've kind of looked at a lot, taking a lot more interest, I'm going to work backwards this year, looking at the big picture and backing up. 2018, I think what I want to point out here is this is green is the domestic fresh production. And we were basically flat, 382, 381. For 5 years. Well, all of a sudden 2019 hit and the domestic fresh production has been at 445 million pounds. So we increased over last year by nearly 60 million pounds from year to year on fresh. That's significant. And I know that the fresh market had lots of challenges this year, price-wise, and this is part of the reason why is that Then the white here is fresh imports. This is the growth in the fresh industry has been since 2000, well, really going back to 2013, has been through imports. And this year, this is a forecasted number through December 31st, because we've still got 3 months that are not in the database yet. But I think we'll be someplace between 435 and 445.50, with Peru having an excellent crop and continually the peak never ends, is what I saw in a recent email from Peru Fresh. So that crop's going to continue to grow. And then the blue here is what I call the North American frozen disappearance. This is what's take the cold storage numbers, what we've produced internally, what we've imported, and how the cold storage numbers vary and what we end up producing. And then the yellow is the exports offshore, and we'll take a look at those where they're going. So this year, I'm suggesting out of North America, US and Canada combined, that we will have either consumed internally or exported of our frozen about 1.6 billion pounds of blueberries. I don't have fresh exports in here because it's relatively small. It's been about 10 million. I did not pull that record up. So there's been quite a bit of conversation, and I've heard it. I know your commission people have heard it about the imports and the impact upon pricing. And so I've taken a couple of slides this year to break out the Canadian and US fresh exports, and this really, frankly, isn't very fair because Mexico now is playing very much into this, and there's a lot of, the data is not good, necessarily good data, but I've just gone back and looked at Canadian high bush fresh exports into the US, or production, as reported by the BC Commission. How many pounds came to the US, which this doesn't make sense, 50 million produced, 48 to the US. How many pounds we exported back to Canada, and then the net to the US. Now, what's happened in these numbers here is the same thing we talked about yesterday in raspberries. This fresh export from Canada into the US includes process that comes down into Washington and Oregon to be frozen. So these are not good numbers, and there's no way we can separate them out. I think that we need to do as the Raspberry Commission has done, and that's petition the Bureau of Census to begin separating a HS code or HCS code, a harmonized code that would separate packaged blueberries for fresh market from the product that comes down here in lugs, so we can see what the impact is. So, but the bottom line of it is, I can tell you from my position, having been in the industry and what I've worked with USHBC, there's folks that have been promoting this. I think that the free trade, I basically believe in the free trade model. And this is just the one from Canada. Mexico, we're going to see the same thing. And you'll see some Mexican numbers here in a bit. But Mexico's got processed grade coming into the States as fresh to be frozen, and basically in California, or it's coming into the States as being frozen in Mexico and then coming in as frozen product. And that's where I put here some of the discrepancy. This shows 57 million from the Bureau of Census numbers. USDA AMS numbers for fresh is 34 million. So if you take those numbers as being accurate, 23 million came in 2018 for processed grade. And the same over here, 66, that'd be 35 million came into the US for processed grade this year. So the AMS numbers are not as reliable as the census numbers. Census is clearly the export numbers. AMS is a voluntary reporting system. And so those numbers are not nearly as accurate as what the census numbers are. U.S. imports, again, U.S. imports by a fresh high bush by origin and year. This goes from 2015, 16, 17, 18, and then through September this year. Argentina, you can see, is really flat. Canada has continued to grow. Chile has been a large exporter of fresh. Mexico is growing. And remember, Mexico and Canada both have processed grade in them because we can't separate it out by HS code. Peru is growing. I expect Peru to end up someplace here in 100 million pounds when they're done this year. This is only from last January through September. we're going to see Peru up here, and you will see this number here go up into the 420, 430 million pound area when it's completed this year. But this is where the product's coming into the U.S. from, based upon U.S. Census numbers. Percentage-wise, I just go back to 2017. In 2017, Chile was 44%, Canada was 18%, Mexico was 17%. This year, Chile is 31%, Mexico is 20%, Canada is now 16%. And as Alan said, USHBC is facing over half of its income is going to be coming from imported fruit. This is from the IBO, and I know that I've even had a couple of growers here mention the challenges in the fall. And there's a thesis that 10 million pounds a week is kind of what clears the market at reasonable pricing. When the market goes above 10 million pounds, we get price challenged. And so this is the 10 million pound line. This is July. Here you are, the end of May. So, but from June through July until here in August, you're above that 10 million pound line a month. And then you get into these dips. So this is for the last 52 weeks back from January. Well, here's what the calendar looks like now. I moved this forward in November of 19, and what a difference a year makes. Here's May. Here's actually about April 1st right here, and here's September 1st here, and you've had that entire period above 10 million pounds a week. And so that's really impacting the fresh business. And I've just put them on the same slide so you can kind of see where the opportunity is here. And you look at the window for BC growers and Michigan growers, that they've really depended upon that August 15th to October 1st market for particularly storage fruit, and have made very good funds in there. A couple of the growers that I do well in Michigan, that's been really a significant income producer for them. And that's basically going away with what's taking place in Peru. And so they are very, very concerned with Peru. And they're also very much, this whole issue of free trade isn't just here by a couple of factors in the Northwest. It's being verbally spoken very aggressively in Michigan. New Jersey's complaining about BC fruit coming in early. The Florida, Georgia growers, they're really upset with Mexico, and it's all growing. And I've got, I was in Mexico 6 weeks ago and looked at a 2,000 acre plantation that's absolutely picture perfect. It's all owned by American money. It's American growers down there. And basically the investment going into Mexico is U.S. money. And this grower is a dear friend of mine as well. But I can tell you, it's not easy for some of these this competition and the stress that's coming out of that. Well, let's look at the frozen pack. Here's the 2019 frozen pack, and we're about 700 million pounds total, and that's what it's actually got with the numbers that Alan put up here this morning, which I did not have yet. It's going to end up at about 715 million pounds, and that's assuming we don't get some other increases coming forth. So if you look at this, and I put this forecast out here, and as you saw Alan's numbers this morning, there's no way that we'll stay at those numbers unless there's economic abandonment. And if there's folks still planning a thought, and that's why I go back, follow the money. And if you've got folks in Whatcom County, which may be one of the lowest cost producing counties in the nation for all that, as far as I know, when they're still planting 1,000 acres last year, if you follow the money, that tells me that they're really not very concerned about where the money's going to come from. If they didn't believe that the profits would be there, they wouldn't be putting that acreage in the ground. And so that's a fairly interesting development. I would say this, the low bush industry, this number was surprising. The low bush industry continues to be concentrated very much in a few hands. A lot of the small growers in Maine and New Brunswick have really abandoned their plantings. They're no longer harvesting them. It's really gone into the large plantations, and the Wymans and the Oxfords and the Centervilles, they probably have 75 or 80% plus growing a lot of themselves. it was kind of there was a sense that this might not go back up, but I think this could go to 350 pretty easily. And remember, the big crop was 400. But I'll talk a little bit about how they're using it. Then going back to where this product's gone to on the frozen side, and this is a slide I introduced to you last year, and I'll just take a moment and if I just use U.S. cold storage alone, I say this isn't realistic, where in 2016 we would have consumed 710 million and fallen back to 471 the next year. But there's a huge amount of private cold storage. Matter of fact, the private storage, cold storage probably represents about 70% of the total cold storage. So if I take and put in an estimate of private cold storage, which is developed by hearsay and speaking with growers that we know and so forth, you take and level this out, and by using private cold storage as the expansion and contraction tank, we get this about 20 million pounds a year increase in frozen disappearance here in the U.S. Or North America. This is U.S. and Canada now. So this year I'm forecasting that we could see that go to 607 million plus an export. I've got a number here of 147, we'll say 150, so that puts us at 750. We produced 700 million this year. We're going to import 50 or 60 million. I'll show you the math here in a moment, but you can see that if you look at those numbers that Alan put up there and that I have put up, which are not, Alan's are more realistic than mine, we're growing about 20 million pounds a year domestically, frozen market growth. And it doesn't seem to be changing. The reason we're out of trouble, if you go back to 2016, prior to 2016, when the wild industry had the big crop, you notice exports were fairly flat for 6 years at 110 million thereabouts. Well, what got us out of the trouble that we were in from that price to that big crop was the wild exported increased their exports significantly. And we'll look at that here in just a minute. So the offshore frozen exports, this is offshore. This eliminates the trade between U.S. and Canada. You can see the high bush exports are the yellow. We've never hit more than about 35 to 40 million, about 35 million pounds here in 15. And actually our frozen exports offshore from U.S. and Canada have actually declined. We're now around 30 million pounds. The low bush exports, which is this number here, these have increased significantly. Here's the 2016 crop. Here's the exports in 17 and 18. And so they did that at basically a 70 to 75 cent FOB Eastern Canada cold storage. And those are prices that they would say probably weren't sustainable. And some of the reasons they pulled back. But what I would suggest, particularly now knowing the crop size up there, that although the wild's been trading in the recent months in triple digits, $1 to $1.05, $1.15 during August, late August, early September, they were asking up as high as $1.20. That was the asking price. I don't think they settled much in that area, but certainly that's where it was. But I think for this industry to be maintained even where we're at, the wild industry must continue to export aggressively. And I'll show you some numbers here where it went in a moment, primarily Europe, but they're actually doing exports really around the world. And then here's the high bush imports. And this is, again, it eliminates the trade with Canada. But the high bush imports of frozen have been last year at 43 million. This year I'm forecasting 53 million there, and that does not include the imports of fresh, which which we aren't able to get a handle on and come into the States for freezing here. So this is the percent of annual production exported by crops. The low bush, as you can see, they've been always a more aggressive exporter. They've had Europe as a primary market for that as over the years, but even going back to 2005, 35%, and then they went as high as 64%, 43%, and I've got them back at 51% this year. Actually, this is an interesting line. As our crop has grown here in the high bush area, we really have, our percent exported has really been trending downward, frankly. 11.8 and then 6% this year. And these two numbers here are just due to shorter crops in those 2 years we had. Frozen high bush relationships, imports. I'm going. Oh, the USDA. One of the arguments that someone has put forth, and I just want to kind of, I guess, quell that a little bit. Here's the total imports of frozen product, and the USDA's buy are here. I've had a couple of people say, well, we're using our tax dollars to buy frozen fruit, and all that does is make more room for frozen to come in from offshore or come in from Canada or Mexico or wherever. And again, I'm not sure what the USDA this past year only bought 12 million, actually only bought 7 million pounds of high bush. But 12, and their biggest year they bought, I think, was back here when they did about 20 million pounds. So again, the USDA buys have been important, but I would suggest they're not critical to the success of the industry. Here's the imports by frozen by origin country. Canada, here's chilies, and notice these list bar here is 9 months. This bar is 9 months. This bar is 9 months. Argentina's been declining. Peru, this is the 9 months. Peru won't increase a bit, but Peru is definitely, there's a new IQF plant going in Peru right now. We will definitely see Peru attempting to export more into the U.S. And I was frankly surprised to see the decline here from Argentina. Let me go back. I just want to pull this slide back up and look at this number here, but just doing the math for this current year that I'm looking at, the frozen utilized, I'm suggesting will be 600 million. We'll export 150 million. So that's being, so 750 million total. Where do we get that from? Well, North American production is 700 million, imports of 65. So there's 765. Well, that's 15 more. So we'll increase the cold storage number next May 31st or June by 15 million. I would say today, I forecasted the cold storage this past year to get down to 90 million pounds, and I thought it would have ended up only getting as low as 97 million pounds. So we didn't move as much out as I thought. I'd suggest, based upon what we see today, unless the imports decline, that we'll see the cold storage forecast, or I'll forecast the cold storage number for next May, June of 110 million pounds. And we know from history that that's not going to support any strengthening of pricing. I'm ever amazed, and I don't know if you can see this, how this, so put on one slide. This is a number that I've just looked at, and where I take the percent of the in-pack from the low number that comes in May to the high number either in August or September. And from that, I can forecast the frozen pack for the year. And essentially, you can see that the frozen pack has been running from a high of 30, the frozen inbound has been running from a high of 30% to a low of 24%. Until I've had these numbers adjusted this week, this number was 31%. And so I left the meeting in Pasco and said, these numbers are too low. We'll see this number go up. I don't think we'll see a 31%. And sure enough, when I put the numbers in, divide it, and do the regression on, or the math on it, we're right now, the cold storage low to high that took place between May 31st and September 30th. I divide that by 0.28. I'm at where we're at, 700 million pounds. And so you can really get a pretty good indicator by watching the cold storage numbers of what the crop is going to be that's going to be put away. The Northwest had the highest today. The Pacific cold storage is the highest ever. The one number that's kind of surprising is the Midwest number is at the highest since 2013, which surprised me. But we truly are seeing. I don't do a lot with pricing just because of the political ramifications of it, but these are but 2011 is the last great price year we had. 2012 wasn't bad, but from then out, it's been really, these numbers here are probably fairly flat. But I've got 95 cents in here and these are numbers that I would call index numbers, or they don't, you got to use them as relative numbers. But I've had folks say, John, you're too high at 95 cents. It should be 88, 85, 80, 89, 90. And I would basically agree with that. There's a huge difference between quoted prices and settled prices. And that's some of the things that I've done with the data. If I didn't work actively with a company involved, I would suggest if I just listened to quoted prices, they're significantly different oftentimes than what settled prices are. And many of you know that as you are in the trade. So this is the forecast, and that I went back to. I know this is probably hard to see. I'll try to pick this. This is last year, and people say, well, what's Chile doing with their fruit? And that since they're bigger, this is Chile frozen blueberry shipments exported 12 months, 2017, 2018. And it's interesting to me that only 15% of Chile's conventional products in both of those years came to the U.S. and Canada. Now, 91% of their organic came to the U.S. and Canada. So Chile is doing a good job on diversifying their shipments. They are significant. They had a nice increase between 18 and 17 to Korea. They had a good increase. They had their Australia and New Zealand was a big market for them. China was a good market for them at 11 million. But we're the ones here. They're shipping 93% of their product of their organic product came to the U.S. in 2018. So, but the U.S. is only receiving about 40% of all Chileans' frozen fruit. So Chile is really attempting to diversify and ship their product elsewhere. So I just bring that message because I oftentimes hear growers saying, well, they're all trying to ship their product here. Well, not really. I don't have this number for fresh, but they also are attempting to diversify. This is the 9 months for January to September for the 18 versus 19. Again, they're down this year. Right now for 9 months, they're at 93% of last year, although they were up last year, as you can see over there. Still about the same percentage to the U.S. and Canada. China is down, which I found interesting this year. And again, the organic is at this point, and I think this could be a shipping situation. I don't expect it to end up at 91%. I think Chile will end up shipping similar to last year's organic into the States this year when it's done. So they'll still end up at about this number over here of 24 million that'll be shipped here in the last quarter. But you can see here that this year they're still running around 40% to the U.S. and Canada, and that's their other crops. The other set of data that I look at is and we buy the data from Canada on the exports of frozen, high bush and low bush. This is again 17 and 18, so we get full 12 months. And I eliminate trade between U.S. and Canada. And notice that the offshore shipments of U.S. and Canadian high bush in 2017 was 28 million, and 2018 was 25 million. And where'd we lose it? Japan was down. This was again a year ago. But going over here to the wild, there's a lot of intertrade there, but they went from 116 million in 17 to 132 million in 18. And their primary market, Germany. Japan increased 17%, whereas ours decreased 13%. Poland, Belgium, which is basically Northern Europe, Belgium's the port of receipt, increase of 30%. Switzerland had an increase. Hong Kong and China were off just a bit. Netherlands, which is Northern Europe. But you go down here to this high bush, and I don't know if you can see this at the bottom, but high bush in 2017 was 19% of offshore exports from U.S. and Canada. And high bush in 2018 was only 16% of exports from U.S. and Canada. And this is all from government data. This is a very, I would say, reliable. There's always miscoding, you see, but this is really very substantial data that you can count on from year to year as being relatively reliable. So I put in here, this is the 9 months for 2018 and 19. For 9 months, offshore between 18 and 19, a high bush, off 17%. We're actually, as a high bush industry, US and Canada combined, we're down 17%. We ship less to Korea, ship less to Japan. Australia's gone up a bit, but they come over here to the wild industry, they're very flat, 1%. Poland was down. Let's see, what else is, I don't see, China, 7.7 million. Remember, Chile shipped 11 million to China a year ago. So, but the wild industry, and we still remain at first 9 months, 16% high bush, we're the percent of the total exports, 16% on high bush last year, 14% this year. So the wild industry has been doing a better job. I think the wild industry probably had more attractive prices in 17 and 18. They were clearly in the mid 70s at FOB, but they clearly have gotten out there, and we're glad they did, because that product, although the wild trade here, the higher price on wild is going to be beneficial. The high bush industry, we lost market share in the U.S. to the wild industry in the last 3 years due to their low pricing. The poly bag business, wild has grown tremendously. Yogurt preps, cost of goods sold. If they can buy a berry to put in yogurt prep at 75 cents delivered Midwest, and they're going to pay us 95 cents, they're going to buy the yogurt prep from the wild folks, or the berries for the yogurt prep. And so this wild price at this point staying in triple digits is good. I'm not confident it will stay there. It may stay there this term. The wild industry is so tightly controlled and they have a huge amount of private cold storage capacity that they may take a gamble on the price being stronger next year if a crop comes in short next year. So anyway, just some wrap up. Obviously the supply growth will definitely exceed 3%. I think we definitely will see price stagnation on the frozen side, and I think frankly on the fresh side as well. We're seeing, and more than stagnation on fresh, we're seeing declining pricing in many cases. Fresh imports rapid growth will continue from Mexico, Peru, Chile less. Chile's being threatened greatly in the fresh deal. Matter of fact, the major factors in Chile all have money in the ground in Peru. Bottom line, they're funding the Peruvian growth. We'll continue to see exit of high cost acreage and operators, and I'm glad that's not in Whatcom County. We'll continue to see consolidation. Venture capital equity funding. Interest remains. I found the venture capital going into the Firestone operation this year. I've known those folks, and many of you know them well. They started out as big growers. They've vertically integrated now to become processors with their distribution. And I had a couple of conversations actually last week with another couple of the processing level people, and they said venture capitalists are knocking on their door every day. There's a real interest from venture capital money. Having said that, one of the venture capitalists that put a lot of money in the industry 7 years ago with it bought Imperial Frozen Foods, which was a mediocre private label poly bagger. Started with Sam Skolnick. Some of you know Sam Skolnick, been in the industry many years down in California. His son Peter sold it to the venture capitalist, but Peter had a very thriving business. Well, they put it out, they basically went bankrupt and their assets are nothing. Many growers that don't get paid for pack, they've sold them out of that. But the poly bag business is really, I think, is still really wrestling for finding the returns that they need there. So it's very interesting watching the capital that's floating around the world, quite frankly. And there's plenty of capital available for the right projects. Labor scarce, more costly, I don't tell you that. Robotics, technical advance in all segments. I don't think we begin to scratch the surface there. Food safety, protocol, This is one I run into. If you just go online and type in social license to operate, and boy, these folks are just, they want to tell you how you can run your operation, and it's kind of a social life. If you don't do it this way, we aren't going to buy from you. And it's a real interesting dynamic. High bush export growth, export of wild to Europe. We hope it maintains. Organic, I would say this: I think organic supply is growing much more rapidly than demand. Price premium for frozen is sharply narrowing. It's coming, the differential. We're seeing organic prices. I had an offer yesterday on organic delivered to Port of Entry USA on new crop at $1.28, and that's just the first offer. I mean, this is December 2nd, 3rd. I get that offer. That isn't. We haven't even got down to arm wrestling yet. So that's organic's going to really narrow up on the differential on frozen blueberries. I just want to really endorse what Alan said about U.S. High Bush Blueberry Council. Casey Conquest is doing a phenomenal job. I couldn't be more excited. Everything rises and falls upon leadership. If Casey doesn't run out of energy, and he's running the fast race right now, I'm personally very excited to have Casey at the head of U.S. High Bush Blueberry Council. We've definitely are doing more. We just hired this week. I'm on the promotion committee. We just approved the hiring of a new food service sales company that's specifically targeting and tying really the fresh to try to get out and tie the peak periods, the missions to drive volume sales. And I just encourage you to be involved in the meeting. Thank you for the meeting, by the way. And Pascal, those that supported it, your commission, you folks did a fabulous job. It's a great meeting, and we certainly enjoyed being there and visiting with you. I hope you'll stay involved in U.S. High Bush Blueberry Council. Washington, Oregon, the Northwest is a critical part. You're really the major contributor. So please stay involved in that. Come to the meeting in Washington, D.C. Get involved. Stay involved. Thank you.